welcome everyone to FTT Chats, where we sit down with some of the great and the good of fintech to have a little bit of a chat. So joining me today is Jason Maud, who is Chief Technology Advocate at Starling Bank. Yeah, I like that title very much. Yeah. I think the last time or the first time we met was when humans could still interact with each other. And yes.
Unlike this new reality we're living in, yes.
Yeah, fun times. All right. So for our audience, our first question is really, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Mm-hmm. I am, as you said, Jason Maud, Starling Bank's Chief Technology Advocate. And I joined Starling Bank, it seems like a long time ago now, it's about 3.5 years ago, before Starling Bank launched publicly. And I joined Starling Bank as a senior engineer. So I'm a software engineer by my original profession. Mm-hmm. And I joined, and there were very few people there. And the first question I was asked when I came to Starling Bank was, "We don't have a direct debit system. Please, could you create one?" So the first thing I did was create a direct debit system for the bank, because that's the stage we were at. We had, we were building our own core banking system and didn't have anything. Then gradually, as we expanded and grew, we realized we needed someone who could go out and talk about the technology behind the bank. So not just what the bank could do for people and so on, but actually how it was built in the background, how all of the pieces fit together and so on, because we need to be trusted as a bank. People need to trust us, otherwise we won't be able to have a business. And in order to trust Starling Bank, you really need to trust the technology behind it and the technology philosophy. Okay. So my job is to go around and increase trust in that technology by talking about it and by revealing how we do what we do.
Do you think it's also a little bit about, showing how you guys are different from the incumbent banks? This is our sophisticated, innovative technology as well.
Sure. So I don't think it's so much, I think it's slightly different than that. I think it's not so much showing how we're different as showing why we're different. Because I think everyone can see that we are different, and, can see the differences between us and the incumbent banks. But the question that, always gets thrown at us is, well, won't the incumbent banks just copy you? Yeah. And then they'll be as good as you will be, and, you won't be anywhere. And then you have to really go into the why we're different in order to essentially explain that, no, they won't be able to, or most of them won't be able to copy us and catch up.
Interesting. Yeah. I think because sometimes you do see little bits in the press, Barclays and NatWest copying and mimicking, some of what's coming out with the challenger banks. Yeah, you see that a lot.
And all of the incumbent banks are trying to do it to a certain extent, and some are being faster than others. But the point about that copying is that once they've, they come along and create a card freezing, and say, hey, we've got card freezing as well now, and then we turn around and go, well, fantastic. In the time you've been spending copying the card freezing feature, we've released more features. And can you copy all of those? And then, and this is the problem they're having with trying to play catch up.
Cool. So you're going to take part in our Open Finance panel on our virtual event on June 10th this year. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about that. I mean, of course, everyone in fintech geekdom knows what open banking is. And when it was launched around, retail banking and current accounts, I noticed around sort of Cybos last year that people started talking not about open banking, but moving into open finance. That's the future. So for maybe anyone watching here who's not a fintech geek, for those in the cheap seats, what does that mean, open finance now?
Sure. So I think obviously your mileage may vary with any answer, and people will have different answers to this. But for me, open banking was very much specifically focused around the banking industry and very much around the CMA 9, the big, 9 biggest banks, and forcing them to open up their access to their customers' data so that their customers could essentially get hold of their own data and move it around. And so it was very much focused on those large incumbent institutions and making them create standard APIs that could be connected to. But really, those incumbent banks are, as we can see with fintech, are not where the innovation is coming from in finance. So open finance is more about, okay, now we've got the banks to open up. How are we actually going to use this data? You know, how are we going to take the fact that we have the ability to have all of this different financial data and connect it all up and have people taking their financial data from one institution and transferring it to another? How are we going to turn that into a solution to a problem that people are having? How are we going to use this to improve people's lives? And that's really the question that I think that is being posed by open finance. That's what open finance is. It's trying to find that what really isn't there, which is that killer feature that makes everyone go, oh yeah, obviously I want to transfer my financial data from one institution to another, because otherwise I won't be able to use X. You know, where X is the killer thing.
I hate using the term killer app, but it's kind of like the killer customer want. I think about 10 years ago, I saw a CIO from Citibank give a talk on stage where he said, my wife and I sat down to try to figure out if there was one place we could see all the money coming into the house and all the money leaving the house, and they couldn't do it. You know, they couldn't see all the different sort of silos that make up that finance kind of platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And I that is where a lot of the effort has gone in the initial sort of run of things that have been created for open banking and open finance so far, right? It's these apps that have been created that are trying to aggregate all of your different accounts. So most people nowadays don't have just one account; they have lots of different accounts from lots of different banks, and they want one place where they can see all of that data. So these aggregators gather this data for you and give you this unified, overview of what's going on with your finances. So that's an obvious application, but I think there are loads of other things that could come down the road that would be even more impactful than that.
So you talked a little bit in your earlier answer about while the big guys are copying features from the challenger banks, you've moved on with other offerings and features. So any good startup talks about market fit and finding what that real core customer need is. How does Starling work with that? How do they find out where to move in terms of customer fit and market fit?
We ask ourselves what problems people are having. So I think that's the key thing, is that we are here to solve customers' problems, to remove barriers, as it were.
What are some of those problems that you're seeing?
So things like, the latest feature that we have released is spending spaces. And this is specifically a problem to do with the situation we're now in, which is COVID-19, which is that there are some people who are stuck indoors. I mean, we're all stuck indoors to a certain extent, but there are some people who are completely stuck indoors. They are not going out at all. But those people still need to get food. So how do they do that? There aren't very many good options. You don't really want to just give someone your bank card. Or a huge wad of cash to go out and buy stuff for you. But what you could do is, it would be great if you could give someone a card, and then that card was linked to a specific pot of money within your bank account that you could spend. You could spend like £100 or so on that card, but no more. So you can't use the card to go on a spending spree. And that's effectively what we have created with spending spaces. So you can have a specific pot of money that you control within your account that is tied to a card, and that card can spend from that pot of money, but from nowhere else in the account. So that's a very specific problem, because obviously that problem it sort of existed before COVID-19. It did exist for some people, but it's really been accelerated now by the situation we find ourselves in. So it's that sort of problem where people's interaction with money is not linear. It's not, there isn't. We keep think we often thought about, a sort of standard way that people interacted with money, but people have all sorts of specific things and issues with money and so on that need to be solved, that they need specific tools for. And our goal is to come along and provide those tools. And, we've done that a lot in the consumer space, and now we're trying to do it in the business space, where the need for tools and automation for small and medium enterprises is even bigger than it is for the consumer.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, a new feature that really came into prominence because of COVID-19 and what we're going on through right now. So obviously that sort of development, I'm assuming, was kind of accelerated because you needed to get it. What are some of those challenges? You needed to get this product out very quickly because of the pandemic going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like, kind of, dealing with that and trying to offer that to the consumers and jumping over some of those barriers from a technical point of view?
Sure. So I'm trying not to sound too smug here, but it wasn't too much of a challenge. The reason it wasn't too much of a challenge is because this feature is something that we had been thinking about and sort of, tinkering around with anyway. It just wasn't so much of a priority. And then when COVID came along, we went, oh, well, this really is more of a priority than it was, a few weeks ago. So we'll put more resources into it and accelerate its development.
Yeah.
But a lot of the way that we have designed our system, and by that I mean not only the technology we use, but how we treat the technology and how we use the technology, is very much geared around this idea of being flexible, being agile, being able to quickly change direction and reassess priorities on a continuous basis, so that we don't get stuck going, well, this feature isn't in the roadmap and there's no space in the roadmap for another 6 months, year, 2 years, whatever. So, forget it. We're not going to be able to develop it.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine maybe those conversations happen at some institutions. Yeah. So moving on, I'm going to go back to open banking a little bit. I was always a big fan of the concept of open banking, and I was really much looking forward to its launch. And I know the CEO of one of your rivals had given an interview a few months ago, kind of expressing kind of disappointment at what happened with the rollout of open banking and the public perception of it. So I kind of wanted to ask your opinion of what do you think about the initial launch of open banking, and has it kind of delivered on that promise?
Sure. So I think that I still really think that open banking is a great idea. Mm-hmm. I think that the initial take up has been low because no one really has been able to explain to the public yet why they should use it and why it's a good idea. Mm-hmm. And that's because we haven't come up with this killer feature yet. This thing that's this is why we use it. Yeah. So obviously the big banks have no real incentive. The big incumbents have no real incentive to explain this to the public. They don't. Why should they? Right? They don't want to see data flowing out of them to a competitor application. Their whole model is based around, we have all of your banking data, so we can provide you with all of your banking services. We are the one-stop shop for everything that you have to do with your financial life. That's how they were built. Mm-hmm. So, the idea of data portability and moving data around is to them just a weird thing. So I think that we need to come up with a good way of describing it. The way I describe it is that, the banks hold your financial data in the same way that banks hold your money. So they have that money, but it's your money. And if you want to go and take it out of the bank and move it somewhere else, you should be able to. Yeah. And, the same thing with data. If you want to take this data and move it somewhere else, give it to someone else to, who needs it to give you a service, you should be able to do that without, and you should be able to do that easily, right? You shouldn't have to print out a year's worth of bank statements on a printer somewhere and then, take that paper, massive paperwork over to your mortgage broker, say, and push it over the table to them so that they can look at it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so I'm going to have a final question, and I'm a big fan of not ignoring the elephant in the room, and this is a question that I really hope is a temporary question on our FTT chats. How are you holding up, currently? With I'm assuming you're working from home and your team is working from home.
Absolutely.
How are you dealing with this sort of personally and work-wise?
So work-wise, it's very interesting. A lot of the things haven't changed. So the way we interact with the our systems and so on, the way we create things technology-wise is pretty much the same. Okay. Because we were set up to run the entire bank from laptops anyway. Obviously, what is a big difference is the fact that rather than now all sitting with our laptops in the same place coding, we are now all over the place. In scattered in various different locations, and that means we have to be much more conscious about talking to each other and so on. And a lot of our discussions that we're having are around how do we make sure that we can communicate well with each other? How can we make sure that we are maintaining those lines of communication and maintaining those little everyday communications which are useful, even when we're not sitting next to each other. Yeah. So, we started setting up rooms, for example, permanent online meeting rooms where you can just log into, and, maybe there'll be a few people there hanging around, and, there's no real agenda for the meeting room. It's just you go in there if you want to ask a question or talk through an idea with someone or what have you.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So that's an idea we've created, which I think is, reasonably useful. Obviously, we're trying out various different things.
What are some of the tools that you're using?
We use Slack. We're using another online communication tool called LifeSize. There are various. Those are the main ones, I think. Yeah. But obviously, everyone has their own tool of choice, and there's been a veritable explosion of these tools being used as everyone is forced to find the one that they want to use.
The one that works. Excellent. Jason, thank you very much for sitting down with me. I greatly appreciate it. And stay safe.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you too.